Emily, our top story today. Israel has promised that more aid will enter Gaza after it approved the opening of 2 humanitarian routes into the territory.
The announcement came just hours after President Biden spoke to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the phone to express his outrage after an IDF strike kills 7 foreign aid workers in Gaza on Monday.
We're now joined by former US Assistant Secretary of Defense Jim Townsend. Good morning to you, Jim. We saw that shifting of the rhetoric, a toughening of the rhetoric from President Biden and also from Antony Blinken yesterday. How much pressure do you think the United States is putting on Israel behind the scenes, and how effective might that be?
Well, I think there's a lot of pressure going on behind the scenes that we don't see publicly. But it's having somewhat of an effect. But we'll have to wait and see just how complete the Israelis are going to be in terms of providing more humanitarian gateways into Gaza. It has an impact, but I will say that there's more the administration can do than just rhetoric. And we're looking forward to seeing something stronger happening to make sure what is temporary becomes full-time.
Many people are reporting that it was the United States that has pushed pressure onto Israel to open those 2 humanitarian routes into Gaza. This is the Erez Gate and also Adod Port, also more goods going via Kerem Shalom. There's a lot of talk in this country as well. Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, also toughening his stance, ramping up the rhetoric and saying that he was deeply displeased with Netanyahu. He said if there is no change in the introduction of humanitarian aid, then we will declare Israel in violation of international humanitarian law. Also, there have been many calls here to stop the sale of arms to Israel. Are those calls going on in the United States?
Yes, they're absolutely going on in the United States, including on the streets of the United States. And that's one of the reasons the administration is turning up the pressure. Is this is an election year for Joe Biden, and he's looking weak or being embarrassed by what's happening in terms of being stiff-armed by Netanyahu. So there's a lot of pressure, both from the humanitarian emergency that's happening, but also politics in the United States. What the UK is doing is very helpful. It takes a drumbeat of complaints and criticism to heap upon the Israelis to make them move. They need to know it's not just the United States, but it's UK and other nations too that are upset with what Netanyahu's doing.
And in terms of that pressure on President Biden, also coming from his own wife, reports in the US this week that Jill Biden has told him to stop it now regarding the war in the Middle East. Is he going to take firmer action? You talked about the rhetoric and actually concrete steps. He's demanded concrete action from Israel, but Israel's still talking about a continuation of the fighting.
That's right. I think it's a matter of trying to get a ceasefire to begin with, trying to get a ceasefire to deal with the humanitarian tragedy that's going on. And so I think whether it's Joe Biden's wife, the First Lady here, or others, the pressure on Biden to make progress on release of the hostages and on a ceasefire is ratcheting up. And if it's going to take sanctions or something along those lines, the pullback of some of the military assistance to make that happen, I think the administration will go in that direction. We'll see what Israel does in the next couple of days. If it's not enough, there's going to be more pressure.
And of course, you mentioned there the pressure in the United States, but also here in the United Kingdom. There's pressure in Israel as well. We're seeing more and more people, thousands of people, actually protesting against Netanyahu. Now, in terms of a potential deal, it has been outlined, as Sarah was saying, Blinken very much on the offensive, trying to put some sort of deal together. Netanyahu has flatly said there is no two-state solution. How on earth do you square that circle?
Well, it's going to be difficult. The two-state solution is something that we're going to have to deal with as we get through the crisis here, the fighting and the humanitarian crisis that we're seeing. The focus needs to be on the near term, which is having a ceasefire. And also in the near term in terms of ramping up the humanitarian assistance. The U.S. has this pier that we're going to be, hopefully, by the end of the month, employing to allow shipborne assistance to come into Gaza, because I don't think the gates are going to be open all that long if it's temporary, as the Israelis said it's going to be. But that's what we got to focus on. The two-state solution, I believe, is the long-term solution. But we've got other things to do before we get to those discussions.
We're waiting for Israel to reveal the findings of its investigation into the deaths of the aid workers. It's going to conclude, as we know, that it was a mistake. It's said that before. The mistake, though, from Israel's point of view, is that they killed international aid workers, because there have been plenty of Palestinian aid workers that have been killed during the course of the last few months. The pressure now really being put on because these were international aid workers that were impacted.
Well, that's exactly right. We have to remember at the very instance that there's a lot of aid workers, and the civilians being killed in Gaza is a huge problem. This particular strike had resonance in the United States because of the group to which the aid workers belong to. The World Kitchens, set up by a celebrity chef who has become this great humanitarian, providing meals in crisis areas around the world. He's won lots of plaudits for this. It was his aid workers that were killed, and that shook up Biden. It shook up the United States because the chef is so well known. His organization is so appreciated. And that really brought home to Americans what's happening in Gaza. And that was a lot of the pressure on Biden over the past couple of days.
And of course, they have suspended their operation. They provide 240,000 meals every single day to these millions of people, 1.5, 1.6 million people in Gaza who are desperate for that food. This is a severe humanitarian crisis, and clearly the implications of that are being seen around the world. How does this end? Does Netanyahu actually have to be deposed, do you think?
Well, it looks like that to me. And I know over the past day or two, there's been some movements within his cabinet to call for elections or to somehow get Netanyahu out of the way. I really don't see movement as long as Netanyahu and his hard right cabinet are in control of things. And that's going to be domestic Israeli politics. It's going to be what's happening on the streets in Israel. It's going to be what happens within the closed door politics in Israel to see if something like that is possible. But we're not going to see a major movement in terms of humanitarian assistance or a ceasefire while Netanyahu is there. I just don't see it.
Thank you very much indeed for your time. That's former US Assistant Secretary of Defense Jim Townsend.